So anything that is on the system, so you may have 5 sales orders, for example, that have gone through the system and they've been delivered to your customer. Merged invoices collates all those orders together and puts it onto the one invoice. You have got further options as well, so single invoices by sales order, as it says on the tin, single invoices by dispatch note. So it may be the case that you've put 5 sales orders through, a few gone onto back order, and you've made one big dispatch note for the other ones, and you can do an invoice for what they've been delivered already. Single invoices by fully dispatched sale. So again, as it says, until the full sales order has been available for dispatch, the invoicing then won't come out until you've actually dispatched the full sales order. Other options as well, so for the merged invoices, so by location. So it may be the case that there's multiple locations in this company and you want to have 5 invoices for 5 locations go into the one invoice location. There's also options for cost centres and customer departments, which in the bottom right here you've got your cost centre codes and customer departments. So it's a good way to, if your customer has some sort of department that they're doing certain budgets for example, so maybe the cleaning department have a budget for something, and the stationery department, and so on. From there you can create your departments and separate your invoices according to the customer's needs as well. Similar with the cost centres, you can have either individual cost centre invoices, and I'll come on to also how you can have one collated invoice but separating the cost centres within that one invoice, which I'll come on to during the session as well. And merged invoices by customer reference. So if you have a certain customer such as the NHS, they give you a customer reference 1 week, which they want to have an invoice for that one reference at the end of the month. What you could do there is make sure you enter the reference on each sales order. When it filters through then to your available lines, Preem will look for every single sales order in the system that's ready for invoicing, look at the customer reference, and then pull those lines into your available lines section according to that reference. So I've got a couple of examples to show you of that as well. Okay, invoice date profile. So this is basically how you want your lines to arrive at the available lines. So you've got your option in terms of how they group together or don't group together, and then you've got the option as to when they're actually going to show in that area. So standard basic means as soon as the items have been delivered in the system, they'll be ready for invoicing as soon as that happens. So it could be the case that for your merged invoices that I've got set for this customer and standard, I might just want to produce an invoice as soon as possible, and then those lines will arrive in available lines straight away. It could be set to weekly, so until the end of the week you're not going to produce an invoice for this customer. Fortnightly, same again, and then monthly it could be, for example, for this customer, I don't want to invoice them until the end of the month for everything they've ordered throughout this month. So by setting it to monthly, what that basically does, which I'll show you shortly as well, in the available lines area, it won't show those lines as available for invoicing even if they've been dispatched until 3 days before the last day. So for example, last day this month, maybe the 30th of September I think, and then on the 27th those lines will then show for invoicing. The reason it's 3 days before as well is just in case the last day falls on a Sunday or something like that. So the lines will show 3 days before, and then until you produce that invoice, your invoice then will state that invoice date profile until you've created your invoice, completed it, and then it'll roll on to the next month. So for example of that one, I think we've got an example already for that. So coming on to the available lines bit, so go to your invoicing, sales invoices, and then available lines to find out what's ready for invoicing and according to your company profiles as well. So just running a search in here, and then you can see all your available lines for invoicing according to the company profile, which will come onto this little area shortly as well. So invoice date, if it's set to this one here, chances are it's set to standard, and that basically means it doesn't need a date, it can be invoiced as and when. If it's set to monthly like these two here, basically until you've produced the invoice, which this one's set to the first of every month it seems, so as soon as you've produced an invoice for this, that'll then roll on to the next month then. So they will still show in your available lines if you haven't created the invoices. Invoice profile, so as we were talking about a second ago, if you wanted to sort by the invoice profile and run your invoice in that way, so you may want to do all the single invoices by sales orders first, or if you wanted to just view them in a certain way, you can sort on that. But you can see the merged invoices here, And another way to see kind of if they're merged or not is by this related ID as well. So the ones that are merged will have the -1, so they can't give you a reference within here as to where it's relating to, because it could have come from multiple sales orders, whereas the one below here, all these ones have got sales order references within the list as well. As I was talking about the merged invoices by custom reference, there's an example of that in here as well. So there's the same company here and here, two different references which have been split into two separate lines for invoicing. So when I click create notes on those, that'll create two separate invoices as are separated by the customer reference setting on there as well. Okay, I will come back to available lines, but I'll just go back to the company details. Okay, next invoice date. So if it was set to monthly, you just set that to be the end of the month or whenever it is you want to invoice your customer. And then, as I said, until you've created that invoice and completed it, it'll then roll on to the next month. Invoice credit and medium. So setting up within here is when you're using your batch processing invoicing. So if you were to set up them as email, when you were running off your invoices and you come to this area here, you can use the batch process to dictate, or basically do one job for you rather than doing two jobs, where you may have a list of 100 invoices in the list, 50 are set to email and 50 are set to letter. Rather than highlighting 50 and clicking print, highlighting and clicking 50 and clicking email, you can hit batch process on 100 of them and they just separate the job according to the invoice medium that's set as well. So that's a time effective way. Pricing print type. So this is basically how this isn't just invoicing as well, by the way. This is for your orders as well. So if it's set to standard, it'll show the discount and the final selling price. So if you've got discount band set against the company, so it may be the case that for all Vow or Spices A class products, they get 50% off. That'll then show as the discount in there if you've got the data field set up on your reports. RRP, I have got a live example of that one as well, which I'll show you. So that one is the RRP less the discount from the RRP and the final selling price. So it'll say the RRP is 200 quid. You've got 20% off and it's landed at this price. So that's the RRP one. And then the net price, as it says on the tin, net price is just basically what the customer is going to be paying for the goods. Okay. Okay, so I'll come out of there, go back to available lines. Okay, so in terms of searching for your customers and the invoice profiles, in the top section here you've got already pre-selected by company profile. So we wouldn't advise to use any other ones unless necessary, because this one basically looks at when they've been dispatched and what the company profile is against the company. So if it's a merged invoice set to the end of the month, that's not now going to show in this list until the end of the month. And there's a reason why you've set that up against a company, because you don't want to invoice them too early. So if you were to use any of these other statuses, so such as the non-company profile one, that's going to ignore the fact that you've set the company to merged, and it'll just show the lines in here. And as well, it wouldn't be dispatched in the system as well. So there are multiple options which we've got a help guide on. So Steve will put that in the chat, which basically explains all of these and what they mean. So I'd advise not to use any other than this unless necessary, where a customer said, right, okay, I've not actually received my goods yet, can you produce an invoice off now, even though you've already authorised the order in the system. So if you didn't authorise the order in the system, there is the option to invoice an authorisation, which I'll show you that as well now. So just closing that and then going back to my company record. So as a default, you can produce an invoice as soon as possible for a customer, which the tick option is here. So ignoring again the profiles here, if I tick the invoice and authorization as a default, when you produce a sales order in the system, this will have the invoice and authorization set, and then when you authorize the order, an invoice will be produced straight away. So what that's good for is for any bad payers that you wanted to get an invoice for before you've even delivered the goods, by using the invoice and authorization, that can just basically help you to produce an invoice straight away. That'll bypass the available lines section as well of invoicing, and you'll have an outstanding invoice ready to be completed and sent to your customer as well. Okay, there are also options for using cost centers and departments. So the cost center one here, I'll show you an example of an invoice that's merged and also separated by cost center. So what you have in Prima, so I'll just open available lines. So I'll just search for that company. So it's my test one there, so we've got 15 lines. That's a good example, I think. So create the notes, and then when I open my my invoice and go to the reporting area, it pulls through a default report which is set against your company. So I'll come on to that shortly as well. So go into the report. What I've set against my test company is to be the consolidated sales invoice by cost center report. So if I view that one, as I've got it set to merged invoice, all my items are on the same invoice, but on this report what it does, it'll separate the goods by the cost centers. So straight away there you can see, okay, well, Anfield, this is the amount, Fenway Sports Group, etc., Melwood, you can see the prices as a summary of the cost centers. So it's a good report visually, as well as sorting your customers' invoices out. So straight away there you can see, right, okay, cost center this is the sales order number, dispatch note number, and if you had multiple sales orders and dispatch notes, they just follow as suit below and then give you a total for each one, and then going across as well. So as you can see here, this is one of the new reports in the system as well. So if your reports don't look like this at the moment, you can update them as well. So just contact customer services if you're interested in doing that. Okay, there are other reports we've got set up in this test database as well. So the sales invoice one. So if I wasn't to sort it by cost center, and I just view the report here, so for a company perhaps that don't have cost center set up, they may just have the sales invoice one, and then straight away just a list of all the invoice lines they've bought for the price and the total, and just straight away you can produce an invoice with all the goods on. Doesn't need to be arranged. For a customer that I've got set up as the RRP, I have got a, let's refresh that, I've got a test company specifically for that pricing type. So just go to the company, and then within that report it's got the sales invoice RRP, and then when I view that report, this is the one that shows you the discount from the retail price. So you can see there, RRP is this, you've got a discount of that, that's what your total is. So using this type of report as well, it's really important to keep your RRPs up to date. So regular housekeeping to make sure your retail prices are kind of in line with what they should be as well. Okay, so in terms of setting up your default reports per company, if I go to the company record and go to the main tab, on your right hand side here you've got default reports. So if I open that up, you can see then it's for everywhere in the system as well, not just invoicing, but you can see rather than me having to go into the report each time and select the one I want, especially effective for when you're doing your batch processing and you're printing or emailing, you can see then sales invoice report, what does my customer want as a default, and then from the list then I can say, right, okay, well actually it's going to have the sales invoice RRP or the sales invoice, and then from there then you can select your report, save and close, and then that pulls through as a default for when you're doing your invoicing. Another point on the invoicing as well, when you do produce your invoice according to your customer profile, it will produce the invoice to the invoice location and also to the financial contact. So you can see here Philippe will receive the copy invoice if it's set to email, and it'll also be sent to the invoice location. So that's the address that we printed on the invoice, and it will go to whatever email addresses are assigned to this contact. So if it wanted to be multiple emails, you can open that contact, put a semicolon in after the email address that's currently in there, and just put your multiple email addresses in if you wanted to send it to more than one contact in a list. Okay, there are a few other things as well in terms of invoicing. So we have covered a sales invoicing webinar previously. So in terms of managing your invoicing, doing your pricing updates and everything, there is a specific webinar just for that. So if you are wanting to watch that one as well, Steve will put the webinar link into there. There are other links as well on the help site for invoice profiles, what the options are and available lines, which I was showing you earlier in terms of the by company profile and everything. So if you want to have a read up on them, you can do. We'll put those links into the chat as well. So just to recap on the session, in the available lines section, Items that will show in there are what's been delivered, and according to the company profile which is set up against your companies. Kind of a way to protect your when you're creating new companies and making sure they've got an invoice profile. What you can do in your administration area, if you go to system keys and company defaults, you can set up a company default within the list. So if it's set to no invoice profile as well, by the way, the items won't show for invoicing. So it's really important that you don't have any customers set to no invoice profile. So by having a default, when you create an invoice, you don't have to worry about making sure it's got an invoice profile. It will have whatever the default is unless you go and change it. So for example, I just want to make sure whenever I create a new company, it always has single invoice by sales order. So saving and closing that, when I go to create a company next time, the invoice profile will pull through. Likewise for the invoice report, if you're always using the same one, more than likely, invoice profile date. So there's different ones as well within this defaults to make sure your companies are having the correct information set. In terms of checking companies now and making sure they've got invoice profiles, if you run a general search against your companies and scroll to the right, there's an invoice profile list here, and you can also update it from the grid manager as well. So if you were changing from single invoices by sales order to merged invoices, then you can just do a sweep of that in the grid manager as well. Okay, any questions, fire them onto the chat. Me and Steve will be waiting around to answer them. Apart from that, I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.